Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar. Today's topic is key elements of a successful supervisory training program. The idea here is I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about certain gaps that we've identified across different industries and across different companies. And these gaps have to do with areas around core social and office skills, sometimes referred to as soft skills. Then there's the part that's really about on-the-floor techniques. We often call them supervisory standard work, and it has to do with the idea of what kind of routines and systems should the supervisors be doing on the floor. And then the final pillar, the final bucket, is around basic problem solving. What are some of those problem solving skills that everyone should be able to do, including the supervisory level? So let's look at each one and just dive into some of the high level information. So if we start with core social skills, a lot of times this is called soft skills or emotional intelligence. It's sometimes a little bit of a misnomer, because to be successful, not just at the supervisory level, but in work in general, this is a big part of it, right? You need to have some of these skills in your toolbox. And what you see here on this slide is a cross-section of some of the more popular ones that we've given and that we have identified as being very important to the supervisory level. So if you look at the left-hand side, you see things such as leadership, influence and decision-making. Communication is a big part of it. That with presenting, a lot of times people think, well, supervisors are not necessarily presenting in the classic way, but they're often being asked to be in front of a group, for example, with huddles or with sharing of information or training, for instance. Giving and receiving feedback is also a big issue usually that people have, how to give it properly and also how to receive it, right? It is a two-way street when you're dealing with feedback. On the right-hand side, then you have how to deal with challenging situations, which will always come up when you're dealing with people and humans and that type of situation. There's always going to be challenges. So this is a big part of your toolbox when you're a supervisor. The one that can't be overstated is all about the coaching and mentoring. I think most people know that a part of being a supervisor is the teaching aspect, right? So you're going to make sure that the workers know how to do the work. You're going to do some kind of training up front, for instance, in a classroom setting. But the coaching and mentoring goes beyond that, right? That's all those opportunities on the floor that says, I see what you're doing. I think you're doing this part right. I think you're doing this part wrong. How do I make sure that continues to grow, including the behaviors that I'm looking for? And then you have some of the more classic elements like change management, assigning tasks, and time management. So what you see here is a little bit of a cross-section. And when you go through this, and it doesn't take that long, a day or two, depending on how many of these skills that one needs to absorb, is all you need really to start getting a good cross section of the skills that you need as a supervisor. If we keep going a little bit, as an example here, this is an example of a role as a frontline supervisor. So this would be part of the leadership portion of the soft skills. And I think everyone will agree, number one is the one that most supervisors think, yeah, that's why I'm hired. I was promoted because of my technical proficiency. I know the process. I came up from the ranks. And that's the part that most people get, and most people think that is the role. But what you see here is the importance of communicating. What else? There's a whole bunch of other stuff that you're expected to do and to know as a frontline supervisor. So even on the technical side, there's the whole aspect of standards, procedures, and tasks. What are they? I'm very I love asking these questions when it comes to standards. So question number one is, do you have a standard? Does the company or the organization or the division have a standard for that particular thing? And so you'll either get a, no, we don't have one, in which case one should be written up. Or more often than not, one does exist, but we're not enforcing it. We're not looking at it. We're not teaching and coaching on it. So that's a big part of the toolkit of making sure supervisors understand that that belongs to them. Teaching is a big part of it, usually upfront in a kind of classroom setting in order to try and get the results that the company is looking for. And then when you get to number 3, now it's getting a little bit more into the hands-on, the mentoring, the coaching. How do you review what people are doing? Audits and assessments are often considered sort of bad words. Everybody's always fearful of an audit, but this is an audit or assessment of how people are doing work. I'm walking around and I'm looking at how things are being done. Are they being done properly according to some expectation or standard? And what that leads to is this concept of a Gemba walk. It's a very popular lean concept for those who have seen or heard of that before. In a nutshell, what that means is you're on the floor. So the idea of a Gemba walk is your role as a frontline supervisor is to be on the floor. You're taking a walk, you're looking at how people are doing work, and very, very specifically, you're looking at those critical control points. Where are all those critical points that if they're done properly, I have a good probability of having success in my operation. And if they're done improperly, then there's a good chance that I'm not going to achieve my production targets. When you get to number 4, leading your own projects and issues, this is an interesting one as well. It's the idea and the concept of owning the process, owning the problem. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. We don't want supervisors to throw the problem to someone else. We don't want them to throw it to engineering or another department. They own the problem as much as possible, as much as can be done within the scope of their knowledge and their work. And then, of course, the promotion of a problem-solving culture, right? We want a frontline supervisor to try to understand the problem and understand that there's always going to be, usually going to be, a root cause associated with that problem. You want to apply the right tool to the issue, and you want them to also understand the difference between stability and capability issues. So stability ones are where things are erratic, they're going up and down, on and off, high and low. Those are different issues and different problems and different tools than one of just simply capability. I'm running smooth, but I'm not running at the target numbers that I'm supposed to be running at. So this is one set of examples. Then we move on to office skills. This recently was identified by us maybe 2-3 years ago as being a gap. And I think one of the big reasons for this is because regardless of industry, most frontline supervisors are promoted from within the ranks. And because they're promoted from within the ranks, the company usually assumes that they know things like Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. And more often than not, that's not the case. There's a lot of struggling that happens with frontline supervisors with these softwares, especially Excel. And as you know, Excel is still a very, whether you use an online version or standalone version, it's a very powerful tool in order to be able to manage the business, manage the KPIs, the targets, the schedules. There's a lot that's assumed that people know how to use in terms of using these softwares. And the nice thing is this can be done in a modular fashion. So you can customize it to say, well, maybe this group of people really are still at the beginner phase, but this group of people know the sort of the basics of it, but they need something a little bit more intermediate or advanced. So here's an example of a package that was done for a particular client that wanted the intro, intermediate, and advanced levels of Excel for their organization. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So when you're dealing with intro modules, you're really dealing with concepts that are really not known. They may have never used the software or not really played around with it much. Then you dive into intermediate. Intermediate deals a little bit more with graphs and charts and how to manipulate data, and even how to the different views associated with using Excel. And then, of course, the progression goes to advanced Excel. So now you're getting a little bit more into functions and formulas, conditional formatting, lookups, pivot tables. Not everyone needs this, and that's why the nice thing about these softwares is you can pick and choose based on the needs of the particular supervisors or in the organization as well. Then when we go into the next pillar, so this is the one that we refer to being on the floor. These are on the floor aspects and gaps that are often there, which we loosely call supervisory standard work. So one package here, if you look at it from this slide's perspective, is performance management. And the best way to look at it is if you refer to that little graph here on the bottom, is it's a cycle, right? Again, regardless of industry, each industry has a little bit of a different slant to this, whether you're in mining or food or manufacturing. But it starts usually with some form of a huddle, some form of a group discussion, group meeting, the beginning of the day, whether it's a 12-hour shift or an 8-hour shift. And here you're preparing for the daily work. You may even be identifying backup plans in case the primary plan is not working. You're reviewing key areas such as people and safety. You see here on the bottom right is one client's example of the things they wanted to discuss during their morning huddles and their night shift huddles, starting with people and safety, but also talk about quality, service, and cost as their 5 elements of the reviewing in the huddles. Then during the shift is all about the shift performance, KPIs, metrics. How is the shift doing? We're not going to wait 12 hours or 8 hours to know if things were going well or going badly. So how are we actively reviewing the work? What are some of the shortcomings or gaps that are happening? Do we have production trackers on the floor? They can be paper, they can be a whiteboard, they can be electronic with phones and tablets. The concept of short interval control. How do we make sure that that feedback loop is as short as possible so that we're not wasting an entire shift before we notice that things are going badly? Again, the concept of walking the floor, these Gemba walks, identifying root causes and solving problems as much as possible on the floor and as quickly as possible. And then that cycle ends with some form of end of shift, right? So there's an end of shift handover between supervisors. So I'm leaving, my colleagues coming in. How are we doing this? It seems self-evident, but a lot of times that is a little weak, right? It's done very quickly, or we're just walking and meeting ourselves quickly in the hallway for 10 seconds. That's not really the spirit of a good handover. So how do we set up the cross shift for success? How do I communicate all the difficulties and issues I witnessed during my shift to my colleague? Communicating work conditions, issues, the status of resources. Is there a problem or is there a gap somewhere that the cross shift may not know about? Here's another way of looking at also some examples of supervisory standard work. This has been done successfully as well with various different clients. So you have an idea of executing a production plan, but doing it safely, doing it efficiently. You know, what are the resources that we need? Who has to go work where, at what time of day, right? Making that plan as solid as possible during the execution of the work tasks. Production efficiencies and consistencies. So again, it's this concept of standards. If we're going to be doing work, we're going to be assessing work against a standard. Hopefully the standard exists and making sure we can always coach against it. You notice here, this is something that I think most supervisors are already good at, is the immediate containment of the problem. So what we often call firefighting. So that's not the problem. The problem is once the firefighting is done, that responsibility of finding more of the root problem, the root cause, and a solid solution still belongs to some level to the supervisor. If it's really complicated, of course, you may want to go and get help from the engineering department or the continuous improvement department. But the first level should be owned by the supervisor. And even concepts such as employee development and the team development. So what are some of the behaviors we want people to have? How do we strengthen those behaviors through the assessments and through the Gemba walks? And how do we communicate this during the morning huddles? This is all part of a classic supervisory standard work. And then the last pillar I wanted to talk about today is the concept of basic problem solving. This is another gap that we've noticed over the years. Not because it's overly complex. I think that's the part of the problem. Some of these tools are not that complicated to do. It's just a question of convincing frontline supervisors that they have the time. If they take 15 to 30 minutes after the fact and just grab the right people, close the door, that this kind of work can be done. There's a lot of good levels of solutions that can be found quite easily and readily if you just take the time to close the door with the right people in the room. So here you have aspects such as plan, do, check, act, brainstorming, asking the questions through 5 whys, fishbone, and the list goes on through Pareto and standard work. The second to last bullet on proper incident investigation, that is a particular concern of mine, or pet peeve, if you want to use a different word, is that it seems that even though a lot of these tools exist in many organizations, the quality of incident investigation can still be rather weak. And it has a little bit to do with this lack of time, this perception that I don't have time to do a proper investigation. And for those of you who have been around the block a few times, you know that often the investigation solutions tend to be simple things like refresh the training and review the procedure and update it. Usually that's just a band-aid, right? It's just a way of getting away from having a good investigation and a good solution and finalizing this investigation process. So we want to add a little bit more richness to these problem-solving techniques, including things like mistake proofing. You know, how solid, how strong is that solution that you came up with, that if it gets done, it will be done properly, and then the likelihood of that incident goes down, or the severity goes down as well. So here we have an example. Probably most of you have seen these before, but it's a relatively simple example of how to conduct brainstorming using a fishbone approach. It's easy to teach. It's easy to practice in a classroom setting. And then you can use this as a supervisor with the right people in the room to get an idea of why something happened and what we can do about it, okay, without being overly complicated or overly time consuming. Okay, so as just of a wrap up is to remember a couple of things. So one thing, I guess in my opinion, is supervisory training should really be customized, right? You have to keep in mind that each industry and each company has its own requirements and its own needs. So you always have to customize the training package using that concept in mind. And you should also consider other areas. You know, you can have legislative requirements, you can have standards. So for example, if you're from the food industry, you have a lot of standards that need to be followed in order to make sure that this gets done. Mining also has its own internal standards that need to be followed. And also if your own company has internal systems, right? So if you have an internal system that's a corporate system, as much as possible, you want to integrate these supervisory elements into that system and vice versa, so that you don't have things that are standalone. Okay, and I'm looking at the clock, so we have time for Q&As in a second. So the approach that we use at Analyze and Improve is very much a customized one anyway for anything we do, but specifically when it comes to training, it's very important that you make sure that when you develop and you deliver these type of training modules, that they're made to some extent and customized for the client's needs, right? And in terms of what you've seen in this webinar, we have provided coordinated programs in order to improve. You're basically looking through these toolkits is to improve the performance of your frontline supervision, right? What do you get out of it? This is a question we often get from companies and managers is, of course, the first thing you get is a workforce with a lot more maturity and a richer skill set. They're able to do their work a lot better. And of course, what happens almost immediately is that translates into better bottom lines. The performance of the plant starts getting a little bit better. The stability starts improving as well. You start getting workers on the floor that know how to do their work better. So it starts with the skill set, but it ends with a better bottom line. And of course, you can, if you're doing this on your own, you can train and coach as well on each of the pillars. You can combine them as a full package, and we've done both for various different clients. And I'll end this part of the presentation just by saying if you have any questions, feel free to contact me or via the email you see on this slide. So thank you for your time. I'll open it up. We have a few minutes for Q&As, or if anybody just has a general comment, please feel free to share.
Thank you, Karn, for the invite. Much appreciated. When I saw your LinkedIn information session about this webinar coming up, I was very interested in seeing what is going to be communicated, so to speak. And you're bang on, and all of your slides there, with the decades of experience I have and with the networking I've done, as you know, within the companies that I've got to work with, whether they were internal companies, with contracting companies, companies having supervisory development type programs are very lacking, that I've seen from my history of work experience. So, you know, your mining giants that are well established, and the key thing is having the right people in place within the company that can promote and endorse and push having such a program in place for their company. And you know, supervisors typically set the culture within the workplace. You know, I can give you multiple examples, but I don't want to hog all the time here. But, you know, for example, you got to go into the crushing plant, and you know, respiratory protection is required.
Right.
But supervisors, one or two of them are going in there, and they got facial hair. And you know, within the respiratory standard, you got to be clean shaven, where the face piece contacts the skin. And we ran into this in the last company I was with, and it wasn't until we had a former Ministry of Labor inspector that came on board and worked with us,
right,
were we able to force and that, you know, the point of the comment was, you know, we're telling the workers, hey man, you know, you got to be clean shaven.
Right.
You know, well, you know, how come we got to do it, and you know, so supervisor or manager, right, or superintendent don't have to wear it. So
that's right.
It's very important, right? You know, I just wanted to make that one comment regarding that.
No, Greg, actually, you hit fantastic share, by the way. You hit two great points. One of them is a lot of these things, when you do a lot of this type of training, of course, you want to add value. You don't want to just do it for the sake of training, right? Like, which a lot of companies do. Oh, come in, do the training, get out, right? It doesn't add any value. That's not what this is about. So if you want to add value, it also has to connect with some of those management examples that you came up with. Say, look, we're about to teach these things to your frontline supervisors. You have to be bought in, right? Otherwise, there's going to be a gap, right? Frontline buy-in, and then the management doesn't, right?
Exactly.
And then the other example you came up with, those legislative points, yeah, totally. As much as possible, some of the examples when I mentioned, whether it's the short interval control or the assessments or the gamble walks, you want to pull those in, right? You don't want them to be just, oh, it's the safety guys. You know, the safety guys will come around once in a while to make sure. Because no, this is not the safety guys. This is your job as a frontline supervisor, and your people, everybody that goes in the plant, we all have the same rules, and it's part of our day-to-day stuff. It's not a one-off that the quality person or the health and safety person does, which is a problem in all industries, right? This aspect of it's someone else's department is not a good approach.
Well, you made a comment earlier about supervisors being out on the floor, and a lot of times, like, and I know I'm not speaking for all industries, but you get into the big mining industries, for example. A lot of the supervisors' time are taken up in the office doing paperwork and going to meetings.
Correct.
So, you know, being visible on the floor and engaging with the workers is so important, in seeing what they're doing, and if they're doing it correctly.
Right.
Supervisors are required to know what their employees are trained in and know how to do their tasks safely, so they can conduct job task observations.
Perfect.
You know, and no, that's a very good point.
Yeah, no, perfect. And as you were saying, different industries have different problems, right? Sometimes they're in the office too much because over the years there's that aspect of too much admin work going on their shoulders. And some industries, actually, if I give an example of the food industry, the opposite happens. They're always on the floor, but they're not doing supervisory work. They're actually doing worker work. They're rolling up their sleeves and doing what the workers are doing. So both are no good, right? You want a supervisor to be a supervisor and to be on the floor, you know, a certain percent of their time. They can't be there 100%, of course, to add value and to observe and to coach and all that good stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, so if they lack computer skills, for example, you know, they're fuddling around on the computers for a couple hours to get an Excel spreadsheet done, to make a pie chart or whatever, you know.
Exactly. No, I appreciate your comments, Greg. You have a ton of experience in this world, so I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I'll just add one more.
Sure.
The slide on the accident investigation bulletin point, you know, having been with the health and safety department as well and being involved in accident investigations and filling in the system, whatever system has been incorporated to file, you know, when you go to look at the gaps within that system, and you made that point, the big one is the action items don't get completed to satisfactory because either it's lack of effort, not enough manpower, it's going to cost too much money and too much time. So, you know, yeah, it gets entered into the system, but does it get taken care of? Yeah,
that's right. And that's why I mentioned it's a pet peeve, and we worked together for many years as well, Greg, so you know that. So there's the quality of the action first, right? Am I just going through the motions of coming up with an action, or is this something like I can look at you in the eye and say, Greg, if I do this task, if someone does this task, it's going to bear fruit. It's going to make sure that event won't happen or won't happen as much, right?
Exactly.
So that's the quality is one that has to be there first. And then, of course, getting it done. If it just goes into this weird system and then it carries on for months and months and years, then what's the use? But they both have to go hand in hand, right? It's one thing to have a system that collects the actions, but I wouldn't mind just taking a little bit more time up front, especially, I mean, you've done this for a living, so you know how important it is, but sometimes people skimp out on this, right? They just say, oh, I got to hand it in by the end of the day or the end of the week. I don't really have time. That's why I made the example of, why don't we just do a refresh of training? That should be good enough. And you find out, no, it's not. It's the reason it happened, whatever it is not because there wasn't enough training. People know how to do it. They're not doing it. Oh, why is that? Well, okay, you have to do that's what you got to figure out, right?
Exactly. Right. No, good point.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Greg. Okay, we're pretty much out of time. Is there anybody else before I call it a day? Okay. So I will thank you once more for joining us during your lunch hour. We will eventually be saving this video on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see it. And all of you are already part of our invites. So every Wednesday we'll have a different topic, and you're welcome to join any one that you wish.
Thank you again, Karen.
Take care, everyone. Thanks again for joining.
Good seeing you. OJ's.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.